The coffee shop was supposed to be neutral ground, just another overpriced New York cafe where Wall Street guys grabbed their triple shot lattes and people like Angela Martinez scrubbed the tables after hours. But when the barista loudly announced that the scruffy man's debit card was declined, when the customers in tailored coats snickered at his humiliation, when everyone acted like poverty was contagious, 29-year-old Angela did something that would alter 2 lives forever. She paid for his coffee with her last crumpled bills. The homeless man stared at her, this weary Latina cleaner in her faded uniform, who had almost nothing but still gave it anyway. And something broke loose in his chest. Because Christopher Langford, secret billionaire, slumming in ripped jeans, had just realized that the woman who mopped his office floors carried more genuine wealth than anyone sitting in his boardroom ever had. The November air was sharp enough to bite as Angela stepped out of the Midtown office tower where she'd just finished her graveyard shift. Her navy blue uniform clung to her skin, still damp from 8 hours of scrubbing, mopping, and polishing. At only 29, her bones felt like those of someone twice her age. The uniform hung loose on her, its company logo nearly invisible after years of laundromat washes on the cheapest cycle. She checked her phone, 5:45 a.m. In a little over an hour, her younger brother Luis, just 17, would be waking up for school. He never once complained about the bare pantry shelves or the fact that their fridge hummed emptily most days. But Angela knew he deserved more than the stale cereal waiting at home. Still, today was Friday. Fridays meant one small mercy she allowed herself. Angela dug the crumpled bills from her pocket as she walked. $4.09. Barely enough for a small black coffee at Parkside Roasters, the kind of place that smelled of money as much as espresso. Most days, she wouldn't dream of spending there, but Fridays were her tiny escape. 15 minutes to sit in a leather chair, sip something rich instead of bitter instant coffee, and pretend she belonged. The cafe glowed golden in the gray morning. Through the wide glass windows, she saw the first wave of professionals already lined up. Business suits, sleek handbags, and polished shoes headed to jobs in the very buildings she cleaned overnight. Angela pushed through the door. The bell overhead chimed politely, though the barista's smile faltered the second she noticed Angela's janitorial uniform. Angela was used to it. She slipped to the back of the line, eyes on the menu she knew by heart. That's when she noticed him. The man looked even more out of place than she did. His flannel shirt was frayed, his jeans torn, his sneakers gray with wear, his hair stuck up wild, his beard patchy and unkempt. He shuffled toward the counter, shoulders hunched as though trying to disappear. Customers instinctively stepped back from him, some wrinkling noses, others burying faces into phones. He reached the register. His voice was rough but steady. "Medium coffee, blueberry muffin." The barista's forced smile vanished. "That'll be $13.25, she said, clipped and cool. He pulled out a worn debit card. She swiped it, frowned, swiped again. "I'm sorry, sir, your card's declined." She said it loud, too loud. Heads swiveled, conversations halted. "Could you try again?" His voice dropped, embarrassed now. She swiped slowly, deliberately. Declined, louder this time. "Do you have another form of payment?" The man patted his pockets, came up empty. His shoulders sagged. Someone behind Angela chuckled. Another muttered, "God, these people." "I'm sorry," the man said, starting to turn away. "I didn't realize." "Wait." The word was out before Angela even thought about it. She stepped forward, pulling the last of her money from her pocket. "I'll pay for it." The room went still. The barista blinked at her as if she'd spoken another language. The man turned, eyes sharp now, startled, studying her face with something like disbelief. "I couldn't possibly," he murmured. "It's just coffee," Angela said softly, sliding her money onto the counter. "Everyone deserves breakfast." She glanced at the register. "Add a small black coffee, too." The math was brutal. Angela didn't have enough for both. That meant no Friday coffee, no 15 minutes of pretend normalcy. But the way the crowd had stared at him, laughed at his misfortune, twisted something inside her. "Ma'am," the barista said stiffly, "this still isn't enough." Angela dug deeper into her pocket, finding a pair of forgotten quarters. She set them down, still short. The man shifted beside her, about to speak, but she lifted her hand. "Just his order, then," she said quietly. "I'm not that hungry anyway." The barista rang it up in silence. The man accepted his steaming cup and muffin as if they were priceless treasures. His hands trembled as he held them. When he looked at Angela, really looked, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not pity, not shame, something else. "Why?" he asked simply. Angela shrugged, already backing toward the door. "I know what it's like not to have much. Sometimes the world just needs a little kindness." The whispers rose behind her again, but she ignored them. At the door, she paused. The man still stood frozen, clutching his breakfast, staring like he'd forgotten how to move. "Enjoy it," she called softly. Then she stepped into the biting November morning, her thin jacket no match for the cold, but her heart a little warmer. Angela walked the 2 blocks home, coffeeless but strangely lighter. She'd done without a luxury she'd been clinging to all week, but seeing his gratitude had filled something deeper than caffeine ever could. Meanwhile, Christopher Langford stood rooted to the cafe floor. Billionaire CEO, disguised in rags to escape his golden cage for a morning, suddenly undone by the quiet generosity of a janitor who had nothing to spare. He had come searching for perspective, for proof that the world outside his penthouse still breathed. Instead, he'd found Angela, and for the first time in years, he wondered if true wealth had nothing to do with money at all. Angela Martinez was only 29, but her body often told a different story. Years of scrubbing floors, dragging heavy mop buckets up stairwells when elevators broke down, and hauling bags of office trash at 2 in the morning had carved fatigue into her bones. She wasn't fragile, not by a long shot, but life had taught her to carry more weight than most. It was early November in New York City, the kind of cold morning that slapped the skin and reminded you winter was crouched just around the corner. Angela stepped out of the Branson building where she had just finished her night shift. Her uniform, a faded navy jumpsuit with the name Clean Right Services stitched in threadbare letters above the chest pocket, was still damp with sweat. She pulled the zipper higher to block the biting air, but it did little good. The streets were just beginning to stir. Delivery trucks rumbled past, leaving behind clouds of exhaust. Commuters clutched paper cups from corner carts, steam rising into the gray dawn. Angela glanced at her phone. 5:42 a.m. Luis, her younger brother, would be getting up soon. He was 17 now, lanky and restless, all knees and elbows, with dreams far larger than their cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Riverside Heights could contain. She thought about the bread and peanut butter waiting for him at home. "Breakfast of champions," she whispered to herself with a small smile, though her heart pinched at the thought. Luis never complained, not once, but she knew he was hungry for more than food. He was hungry for opportunity. Robotics club, science competitions, college, all things with price tags attached, and price tags might as well have been walls. Angela pushed those thoughts aside. Today was Friday, and Friday meant one small luxury: coffee. Not the instant kind she usually stirred into a chipped mug at home, but real coffee, dark, rich, brewed by someone else. She dug into her pocket as she walked, pulling out a handful of coins and a few crumpled bills. She counted carefully, lips moving silently. $4.09, just enough. The cafe was 2 blocks away, its gold-lettered sign already glowing against the steel-gray sky. Parkside Roasters. The kind of place where men in pressed suits ordered oat milk lattes with triple espresso shots, where women in heels checked stock prices on their phones while sipping caramel macchiatos. Angela had always felt invisible there, the cleaner among customers who smelled of money and success. Still, on Fridays, she bought herself 15 minutes of pretending she belonged. She quickened her pace, her stomach already warming at the thought, when she noticed something unusual. A man was ahead of her, shuffling toward the cafe's entrance. At first glance, he looked like any of the city's forgotten souls. His jacket torn at the cuffs, his jeans frayed, his shoes worn thin. His gray hair stuck out in unruly tufts, and his beard was the kind that had been trimmed once upon a time but hadn't seen a razor in weeks. Angela slowed. She had seen plenty of homeless men during her shifts, sleeping in doorways, asking quietly for change. But something about him made her pause. He moved not with the staggering disorientation of the desperate, but with a deliberate, almost cautious dignity, as though trying to make himself smaller, invisible. Inside, the cafe was buzzing. The air smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, the glass cases gleaming with croissants and blueberry muffins. The line stretched toward the door, filled with professionals clutching leather briefcases and designer handbags. Angela joined the end, tugging her uniform sleeve lower. She knew the looks she'd get, the tight smiles, the quick glances that said you don't belong here. The man in the ragged jacket shuffled to the counter. "Medium coffee," he said in a gravelly voice, "and a blueberry muffin." The barista, a young woman with glossy blonde hair and a name tag that read Chloe, didn't bother hiding her disdain. "That'll be $13.25. He produced a debit card, so worn its edges curled. Chloe swiped it once, frowned, then swiped again. "Declined," she announced, louder than necessary. Conversations in the cafe slowed, heads turning. "Could you try again?" the man asked quietly. Chloe swiped it again, slower this time, her lips curving into something just shy of a smirk. "Declined. Do you have another form of payment?" The man patted his pockets, his shoulders sagging further with each empty pat. I don't." From somewhere behind Angela, someone snickered. Another voice muttered, "These people always trying to freeload." A third whispered, "Probably contagious." The man turned, ready to leave, his eyes downcast. That's when Angela stepped forward. "I'll pay," she heard herself say. Her voice carried across the cafe like a bell. Chloe's eyes widened, as though Angela had spoken in a foreign tongue. The man looked up, startled, his gaze locking on hers. His eyes weren't dull as she'd expected, but sharp, alive, filled with something that almost looked like grief. "You don't have to," he murmured. "It's just coffee," Angela said, pressing her crumpled bills onto the counter. "And a muffin. Everyone deserves breakfast." Chloe hesitated. "That's not enough for both," she said flatly. Angela dug deeper into her pocket, producing 2 quarters she hadn't realized were there. She placed them on the counter, her hand trembling. "Still not enough," Chloe said. The man shifted beside her, ready to protest again. Angela lifted a hand, silencing him. "Just his order then," she said softly. "I'll go without." The cafe went quiet. No one laughed now, no one whispered. They simply stared, as though unsure what to make of her. Chloe rang it up reluctantly, handing the man a steaming cup and a paper bag with the muffin inside. He held them like sacred treasures, his hands trembling slightly. "Why?" he asked, voice raw. Angela shrugged, already stepping back. "I know what it's like to not have much. Sometimes the world needs a little kindness." She turned and walked toward the door, ignoring the weight of 100 eyes. At the threshold, she paused, glancing back. The man still stood at the counter, frozen, staring at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "Enjoy your breakfast," she called softly. Then she pushed through the door, into the bitter morning air, her stomach empty, but her heart strangely full. Across the street, a sleek black sedan idled, its windows tinted dark, its engine humming softly. Inside sat a man in an immaculate suit, speaking quietly into an earpiece. His eyes followed Angela as she walked away, her breath puffing in little clouds. "Mr. Langford is maintaining his cover," the man whispered. "But sir, that interaction was unexpected." Back in the cafe, Christopher Langford, hidden behind rags and exhaustion, watched Angela disappear around the corner. He sipped his coffee slowly, thoughtfully. Around him, the cafe slipped back into its usual rhythm. Customers chuckled at their phones, laptops clicked open, deals were made over steaming cups. The humiliation already forgotten, but not by Christopher. He carried the muffin to a corner table, pulled out a battered notebook, and wrote a single line in careful script. "Angela Martinez, cleaner, paid for coffee." He stared at the words, his jaw tight. Then, beneath it, he wrote 2 more. "Find out more." Angela walked slowly toward the bus stop, savoring the strange warmth that lingered in her chest. Her feet ached, her stomach grumbled, but she carried with her the quiet satisfaction of having done the right thing, even when it cost her. She didn't notice the sedan pull away from the curb, didn't hear the quiet hum of tires following her route home. She only thought of Luis, how she would tell him there was no Friday coffee this week, but maybe she could stretch the last of the peanut butter until payday. The bus arrived with a sigh of brakes, and Angela climbed aboard, settling into a seat near the back. As the city rolled past the smudged windows, she leaned her head against the glass, eyes heavy. She didn't think about the ragged stranger again, not then. She had more pressing worries: rent, bills, groceries. But across town, high above the streets in a penthouse office lined with glass and steel, Christopher Langford was already turning her life into a question he meant to answer. And the avalanche had begun. The bus hissed to a stop, its brakes groaning in protest. Angela Martinez climbed aboard, clutching her jacket close against the November chill. She slid into a seat near the back, resting her head against the fogged window. The city outside blurred into streaks of gray and red, taillights, exhaust fumes, early commuters with steaming cups of coffee she could no longer taste. Her stomach was empty, but her heart carried a strange warmth. She didn't regret giving up her few dollars for that stranger. What Angela didn't see, what she couldn't possibly have guessed, was the black sedan that pulled from the curb across from Parkside Roasters the moment she left. The vehicle was sleek and understated, the kind men in power favored precisely because it didn't call attention to itself. Inside, Thomas Green adjusted the knot of his tie and spoke softly into a headset. Mr. Langford maintained his cover. But, sir, that woman, it was unexpected. Christopher Langford sat slouched in the back seat, still wearing the ragged jacket, the cheap flannel shirt he'd purchased from a thrift store on 9th Avenue, and the shoes deliberately scuffed to look like cast-offs. The billionaire wore them convincingly, his posture bent, his hands roughened with grime he'd rubbed into the skin himself. He stared through the tinted glass at the departing bus, as though it held the answer to a riddle. "Oh, not yet," he murmured, shaking his head when Thomas looked back through the rearview mirror. His voice, hoarse from days of lowering its register, betrayed none of the authority it usually carried. The sedan pulled away, merging with the river of taxis and delivery trucks. For a few blocks, Christopher remained silent, eyes fixed on the city outside. Neon signs blinked awake. A woman in scrubs hurried toward a clinic. A construction worker in a neon vest wolfed down a bagel as he crossed against the light. Ordinary lives, unseen from the penthouse offices, where decisions were made in boardrooms scented with polished wood and expensive cologne. At 47th Street, Christopher finally spoke. "Everything about her, Thomas. I want to know." Thomas's jaw tightened. He'd served Langford for nearly 20 years, long enough to recognize the dangerous spark in his employer's eyes. "Sir, a background check is possible, but may I remind you, this experiment was meant to observe, not to interfere." Christopher shifted, the disguise sliding off him like a second skin. He sat straighter, his bearing altering by degrees, until he looked nothing like the tired man who had been humiliated in the cafe. "I decide when observation ends and action begins. Find out who she is." Thomas hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." The sedan glided into the underground garage of Langford Tower, 58 stories of steel and glass that sliced into the morning sky like a blade. The contrast was jarring. Above, the building shimmered with wealth and ambition. Below, the concrete garage smelled of oil, salt, and faint mildew. Christopher stepped out, his movements changing with every stride. By the time he reached the private elevator, his shoulders squared, his chin lifted. The air around him seemed to shift, as though power itself clung to him like a tailored suit. When the elevator doors slid open to the top floor, he was no longer the ragged stranger. He was Christopher Langford, CEO of Langford Industries, a man Forbes once called the Iron Visionary. Angela's bus rattled north, stopping every few blocks. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass, letting the city wash over her. At Riverside Heights, she stepped off and walked the 3 blocks home, her legs heavy from the night shift. The apartment building loomed, its bricks darkened by decades of weather, graffiti etched into the lower walls. Inside, the smell of damp carpet and old paint clung to the stairwell. The elevator hadn't worked in years, so she climbed to the 4th floor, each step groaning beneath her weight. When she opened the door to apartment 4B, a familiar smell of detergent and yesterday's cooking greeted her. Luis was already awake, hunched over their battered kitchen table, fiddling with the stubborn power button of their aging laptop. "It won't even turn on now," he said, frustration in his voice. Angela's heart pinched. That laptop had been their lifeline, his for schoolwork, hers for tracking shifts and bills. She crossed the small room, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure something out." Luis forced a grin, always trying to be older than his years. He handed her a flyer folded into quarters. "Mr. Peterson gave me this. Robotics Club. Winter session." His eyes betrayed the hope he tried to bury. Angela read the bold letters, then the line at the bottom that twisted her stomach. Fee, $300. To her, it might as well have been $3,000. She folded the flyer slowly, setting it aside. "We'll talk about it later," she said. Luis looked at her, reading the truth in her eyes, but he didn't push. Instead, he hugged her quickly, muttering, "Thanks for breakfast," before retreating to his room. Angela opened the drawer of her nightstand and added the flyer to the growing pile. Electricity bill stamped final notice. Rent due in a week. Water bill from last month. Dreams buried under paper. She lay on the couch for an hour, staring at the ceiling, the memory of the man in the cafe pressing against her thoughts. His eyes, the way he'd asked, "Why?" She had no answer, except that she knew what it was like to be invisible. Across town, Christopher Langford shed the last of his disguise in a marble bathroom larger than Angela's entire apartment. Steam rose from the shower as he scrubbed away the grit he had rubbed into his skin. He studied his reflection in the mirror. At 63, his hair was silver, his face lined, but his eyes still burned sharp. He looked powerful, but he felt hollow. Thomas waited outside, a tablet in his hands. "Sir," he said when Christopher emerged in a dark robe, "you asked for information." On the screen glowed an employee ID photo. Angela's tired but determined face stared back, her dark eyes steady even under the harsh fluorescent lighting. "Angela Martinez," Thomas read. 29 years old, employed by Clean Right Services for 3 years. Attendance near perfect, except for 2 days last year when her brother was hospitalized with pneumonia. She is his guardian since their parents died in a car accident 5 years ago. They live in Riverside Heights. Christopher's eyes narrowed at the name. He knew Riverside Heights. Langford Industries had bought half the block, planning to bulldoze it for luxury condos. "Financial status?" he asked. Thomas shifted uneasily. "Behind on utilities, rent perpetually late, works an average of 60 hours a week between regular shifts and overtime. Her brother, Luis, is an honor student with strong aptitude in science and technology. Teachers describe him as exceptional. However," he paused, "they cannot afford extracurricular programs." Christopher stared at the photo again. In that exhausted face, he saw something the boardroom had forgotten: resilience, dignity, an unwillingness to bow even when bent by life. "Her roots," he said softly. "Where she works, when. I want it all." "Sir, forgive me, but this is crossing lines," Thomas said carefully. "She is an employee of a contractor. Tracking her—" "You may not," Christopher interrupted, his tone firm. "Just give me the information." Thomas bowed his head. "Yes, sir." Angela's day wore on. After a few hours' sleep, she was back on her feet, pulling on the same uniform, lacing the same worn sneakers. Before leaving, she made Luis promise to eat the sandwich she left in the fridge and finish his homework before midnight. The Richardson building awaited her that evening. Newer than most, all glass and steel, the kind of place where a single abstract sculpture in the lobby could pay off her debts 3 times over. She joined the other cleaners in the basement supply room, her co-worker Maria raising an eyebrow. "Double shift again?" Maria asked. Angela smiled faintly. "Just trying to live." They worked side by side for hours, their movements efficient from practice. Angela liked the rhythm of it, the quiet. Tonight, though, her mind kept wandering back to the cafe, to the stranger with sharp eyes and trembling hands. She didn't know that at that very moment, across the city in his penthouse office, Christopher Langford was staring at her photograph, whispering a single word that would change both their lives. Everything. Angela was standing in front of the open fridge, pulling out the last of the milk for Luis's cereal, when the knock on the door came. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make her pause, spoon in midair. She set the carton back on the counter, wiped her hands, and glanced over at the door. Her heart, which had been slowing from the morning's exhaustion, skipped a beat. She hadn't been expecting anyone, but she knew who it was before the first knock faded. The man who had been following her every move, the man she'd met in the cafe, who had thanked her for a cup of coffee, who had shown her more respect than anyone she'd ever known. The same man who had been wearing rags and had seemed so humble, so down to earth. William, she thought. But she didn't know who he really was. Not yet. She opened the door carefully. There he stood, in the same clothes she'd seen him wear the other day, his posture still off, but somehow more grounded, as if he had decided just for a moment that he didn't need to shrink into himself anymore. His hair was wild, his clothes as wrinkled as they had been when they first met. But in his eyes, those eyes that had caught her attention at the cafe, there was something different now. It wasn't just gratitude anymore, it was something deeper, something that felt almost familiar, something that made her heart stutter in her chest. "Hey," she said, her voice almost too soft, too unsure for the conversation she knew would follow. "Hey," he replied with a small smile, standing awkwardly in the doorway, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Angela felt a pull in her chest, a strange, unfamiliar combination of guilt and curiosity. "What's going on?" He took a breath, as if collecting his thoughts, before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other day, and I wanted to ask you something." Her eyebrows furrowed in confusion, but she stepped aside, allowing him into the small, cramped apartment. Her eyes flickered over his face, trying to read what was going on inside. This man, whom she thought she knew, was shifting before her, like a puzzle whose pieces didn't quite fit together. They sat down at the kitchen table. Luis had already left for school, and the apartment, usually so noisy, felt like a small, quiet cave in that moment. Angela's hands rested on the table, palms flat against the surface, trying to remain calm. But she felt something stir deep inside her, the same feeling she had when she met him in the cafe, the quiet realization that there was more to him than met the eye.
I don't know how to explain this," William began, his voice low, almost reluctant. "But there's something you need to know, and I don't know how you'll take it." Angela swallowed. Her pulse quickened, the edge of fear creeping up her spine. She thought of her brother Luis, how much he needed a break from everything, how much they both needed help, how much she was willing to give for just a little hope in their lives. But this man, this stranger, who had become such a big part of her thoughts these past few days, was still a mystery. William's eyes softened, and for a moment, it felt as though he was trying to steady himself, trying to make peace with something. "You've been kind to me," he said quietly. "More than anyone ever has." Angela's breath hitched. I just bought you coffee." "That's the thing, Angela," he said, leaning forward. "It's not about the coffee." She tilted her head slightly, unsure of where he was going. He continued, his voice barely above a whisper now. "I need you to understand something. I'm not who I said I was." Angela froze. "What?" For a brief, absurd second, she wondered if he was going to tell her he was some kind of undercover cop, or perhaps a criminal. Her mind spun with wild possibilities. She shook her head. "What do you mean?" "Angela." He rubbed his hands across his face, trying to find the right words. I'm not really a homeless guy, He stopped, then sighed. "I'm William Langford, Chief Executive Officer of Langford Industries." There it was. The words she hadn't expected. They sat between them like a bullet, the shock of them piercing the air. Angela blinked, her stomach lurching in disbelief. William Langford. The name floated in her mind like smoke. Langford Industries, one of the most prestigious tech firms in the city. He couldn't be serious. "Wait," she said, her voice trembling. "You're telling me you're a billionaire?" William nodded slowly, his face unreadable. "Yes." For a moment, the room spun around her. She leaned back in her chair, hands on the arms, her heart suddenly beating much faster than it should. The idea of him as some kind of CEO, a corporate giant, felt absurd. This was the same man who had walked into a cafe in torn clothes, whose debit card had been declined. Someone so fragile in appearance, it was hard to believe he belonged to a world of million-dollar investments and board meetings. "Why?" she whispered. "Why didn't you just tell me?" William's gaze dropped to the table, as if ashamed. I wanted to know what it was like, Angela, to see people for who they really are when they don't know who I am, to understand how my company affects them, how my decisions affect real lives. By pretending to be someone else? She asked, incredulous. I know it's messed up, he replied quietly, his voice tight with guilt, but I thought I could learn more, about humanity, about kindness, about dignity. Angela felt a wave of anger rise in her chest, but it was followed quickly by a sharp ache of disappointment. You're playing a game with me, with all of us. He looked up at her then, his eyes pleading for understanding. I didn't mean for it to go this far, it just happened. I wanted to understand how we treat the people who are invisible to us. People like you, like the cleaners in my building, the people who make everything work while no one notices. Angela's head swam with conflicting emotions. She had to look away, her hands clenched on the table. You really don't get it, do you? She said, her voice low but fierce. People like you, people with money, with power, don't have to play games to get what they want. You can walk into a room, and everything is handed to you. But we, the people you're observing, we don't have that luxury. We have to scrape and fight for every little thing. William didn't respond, and for a long moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of a distant clock. Angela's heart thundered in her chest. Why did you choose me? She asked suddenly, the question escaping before she could stop it. William's expression softened. Because you're different, Angela. You saw me when no one else did. You saw a person in me when all I've seen for years is just an object, a CEO, a title, a symbol of power. Her breath caught in her throat. She shook her head, standing up. This is too much. I don't know what you want from me. William stood as well, his movements slow and hesitant. I don't want anything from you. I just want you to understand that what I've done, it's not just for me, it's for all of us. Angela stared at him for a long time, feeling a quiet storm building inside her. You think you can fix everything by playing dress up, by hiding who you really are? William's face tightened. I don't know, but I'm trying to figure it out. I'm trying to do better.
Angela met his gaze, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw the man she had met in the cafe, the one who had trembled as he took the coffee, the one who had been humble in the face of kindness. But now, that man was buried under layers of confusion, betrayal, and far too many questions. I can't be part of your experiment anymore, Angela said, her voice steady but firm. Not like this. As she spoke, she realized something deep and painful. She had been trying to help him, to see the humanity in him, but he had been too lost in his own experiment to see hers. William stepped back, his shoulders slumping. I understand. Angela walked to the door. Goodbye, Mr. Langford. And with that, she closed the door behind him, the weight of his presence still lingering in the air. It had been a week since Angela had shut the door on William Langford, the man she thought she knew, the man who had been living a double life, a life of contradictions and unspoken truths. She had told herself that the situation was over, that she didn't need to see him again. But as the days passed, a gnawing discomfort settled in her chest, one she couldn't quite shake off. Something didn't feel right. She kept replaying their conversation in her mind, trying to make sense of it all. William had claimed to want to see how people lived, to understand how his decisions impacted the lives of ordinary workers like her. But the more Angela thought about it, the more she questioned the truth behind his motives. He had admitted to pretending to be someone else, to hiding his true identity from her, yet he had also seemed sincere, at least in moments. But sincerity wasn't enough. She couldn't ignore the cold, hard truth that he had manipulated her, had used her, all while playing the role of a man without resources, without power. She wasn't naive. She had seen this behavior before, in boardrooms, in offices, in places where the rich played games with the lives of the poor. That morning, as Angela wiped down the counters at the Richardson building, her mind wandered again. She had barely slept the night before, tossing and turning, caught between guilt and anger. Her shifts had started to feel like one long blur of endless tasks. But today, something felt different. She wasn't focused, her hands moving on automatic, almost as if they were betraying her thoughts. Then it happened. A familiar face emerged from one of the executive floors, one that she had never seen before, but whose presence sent a chill down her spine. It was a tall man in a well-tailored suit, someone who looked like he had just stepped out of a boardroom, or maybe even a courtroom. He was walking with a purpose, his gaze fixed straight ahead, as if he had somewhere important to be. But what caught Angela's attention was the fact that he was staring directly at her. She froze, wiping down the counter once more, trying to focus on the task at hand. "Excuse me," the man called as he approached. His voice was smooth, but there was something off about it, too polished, too deliberate. "Are you Angela Martinez?" Angela's heart skipped. She turned slowly, surprised that anyone in the building knew her name. "Yes," she answered cautiously. "Can I help you?" The man smiled politely, though there was no warmth in it. "I'm with Langford Industries," he said. "I was wondering if you had a moment to speak. I'm conducting an internal review of the company's operations, and I'd like to ask you a few questions." Angela's stomach turned. Langford Industries. The very name sent a flood of memories crashing back, of William, of the lies, of the strange game he had played with her life. She couldn't help but feel uneasy, but she forced a polite smile. "I'm not sure what kind of review you're talking about," she said. "I'm just a cleaner here." The man's smile tightened, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I understand, but you're one of the few employees who works across multiple buildings, and I'm sure you've seen things that others haven't. I'm just curious to hear your perspective." Angela felt the pressure building. She glanced at the man's polished shoes, his perfectly pressed suit, the expensive watch on his wrist. It was all so familiar, so like William. A part of her wanted to tell him to get lost, but another part of her, the part that had been manipulated by William, couldn't ignore the subtle pull to know what was going on. "All right," she said, though her voice trembled. "What do you want to know?" The man's smile widened, as if he had expected her to agree. "I'm interested in your experience here. You've been with the company for 3 years, yes? And you've worked with Langford Industries for a good portion of that time. Have you ever felt that the company values its employees? I mean, really values them?" Angela's mind spun. She had worked at Langford Industries for over a year, cleaning the building late at night, when most of the employees were gone, hidden in their offices, behind closed doors. She had seen how they treated the people who worked in the shadows. But this man, he was fishing, trying to get her to reveal something that wasn't meant to be seen. She felt the lie begin to rise in her throat, ready to spill out. "I've seen things," she said slowly, cautiously. "But I think you're more interested in what your bosses want to hear." The man's expression stiffened, and for a moment, Angela wondered if she had made a mistake. But then he chuckled, a sound that was more unnerving than reassuring. "I assure you, Ms. Martinez, I'm not interested in what anyone wants me to hear. I'm interested in the truth, the real truth." Angela took a step back. The truth. She had been so close to it, so close to understanding what was really going on behind closed doors at Langford Industries. And now, this man was trying to drag her into something that didn't sit right. "I'm just a cleaner," she repeated, her voice firm. "I don't have any truths for you." The man studied her for a moment, his eyes lingering too long. "I see," he said, his voice cold now. "But if you ever change your mind, we'll be watching. Langford Industries values those who understand the bigger picture." Angela didn't respond. She watched him walk away, his polished shoes clicking on the floor, his presence lingering like a bad smell. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. She had been so careful, so focused on keeping her distance from William and everything he represented. But now, she was tangled in something much bigger than herself. By the time she returned home that evening, Angela's mind was whirling. It felt as though the world was closing in on her, the weight of her decisions pressing against her chest. She entered the apartment, the faint smell of Luis's cereal still hanging in the air. She dropped her bag on the floor and slumped into a chair. Luis was already at the table, his homework spread out before him. He barely looked up as she entered. "What's wrong, sis?" Angela shook her head, trying to push the weight of the day off her shoulders. "Nothing, just a long day."
Luis narrowed his eyes. You sure? You look like you're about to burst. Angela didn't answer. She couldn't answer, not yet, but she knew. Something was wrong. The man from Langford Industries, the questions, the way he had watched her. He was connected to William, and she was too deeply involved in his world now. She could feel the web tightening around her. The more she thought about it, the more she suspected that William wasn't just pretending to be someone else. He wasn't playing a game with her. He had stuck to her life. He had engineered this moment, and now it was unraveling right before her eyes. And somehow, she was going to have to make it stop. It had been 2 days since Angela's encounter with the man from Langford Industries. 2 days since the chilling realization that someone from inside the company, had been watching her. She could still feel the weight of the man's stare, his words hovering like a storm cloud above her head. Langford Industries values those who understand the bigger picture. The words echoed in her mind, each repetition stoking the fear that had slowly begun to unfurl in her chest. She had thought she was simply doing her job, keeping her head down, surviving. But now she was tangled in something far larger, far more dangerous. And William Langford, the man who had once seemed like an innocent stranger, was at the heart of it all. Angela tried to shake it off. She focused on the small tasks of everyday life, preparing dinner for Luis, paying the electricity bill, organizing her next cleaning route, but the gnawing anxiety never stopped. Something had shifted, and it wasn't just her job, it was her life. That evening, after dropping Luis off at school, Angela went into work early, hoping the familiar rhythm of mopping floors, wiping counters, and emptying trash bins would soothe her mind. She had learned long ago to find peace in the repetitive motions of cleaning. But tonight, nothing felt normal. The Richardson building was quiet, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound, as she moved through the hallways. She had just finished cleaning one of the executive offices when her phone buzzed in her pocket. At first, she ignored it, too absorbed in her work, but then the buzzing grew persistent. Reluctantly, she pulled it out. The screen flashed with an unfamiliar number, a number she didn't recognize. Hesitant, she answered. Hello? There was a brief pause on the other end, a shuffle of paper, and then a voice that made her blood run cold. It, Ms. Martinez, we need to talk. It was the same man who had questioned her in the building just a few days ago, his voice now cold and commanding. We have some information about you. Angela's stomach twisted. What kind of information? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Why don't you come down to the office? The man's tone was smooth, almost friendly, but there was an underlying tension that made Angela's skin prickle. We can discuss this in person. She had a feeling she knew exactly where this was going. She had heard rumors about people like him, people with power who were willing to destroy lives for the sake of their own ambitions. And now, Angela was at the center of it all. I'm not coming to see you, she said, her voice firm, more confident than she felt. Tell me what you want. There was a long silence, as though the man was weighing his options. Then he spoke again, his voice laced with menace. You don't have a choice. The story is already out. Before she could respond, the line went dead. Angela's hands shook as she stared at the phone. She didn't know what story he was referring to, but she had an inkling it wasn't good. She'd heard whispers in the building, hushed conversations when people thought no one was listening, and now it was clear. Something was happening to her, something she couldn't control. The unease she had been feeling all week exploded into full-blown panic. Her mind raced. What had he meant by the story is already out? What was he going to do to her? She didn't have time to find answers. As she rounded a corner in the building, she caught sight of a television in the break room, its screen flashing with the unmistakable headline, Exclusive, Langford Industries' Secret Experiment, Exposing the Invisible Workers. Angela's heart stopped in her chest. She moved closer, her legs suddenly weak. She could hear snippets of the news anchor's voice as she walked toward the screen. In an astonishing turn of events, a whistleblower from Langford Industries has exposed a shocking experiment involving the company's cleaning staff. Sources claim that the company's top executives, including CEO William Langford, were conducting a series of tests,
on the lives of their employees, monitoring their every move without their knowledge. The story has sparked outrage, with many asking whether Langford's actions were ethical or illegal. Angela felt her knees buckle. She grabbed the back of a chair, holding on tight as the room spun around her. The report continued, detailing the company's experiment of watching its lower-level employees, specifically the cleaning staff, to gauge how they were treated and what they needed to survive. The camera then cut to a grainy video clip of her, Angela, standing in front of the Richardson building, talking to that man who had been following her. The video was shaky, clearly filmed from a distance, but there was no mistaking her face. Angela's stomach turned. She felt as though she had been punched in the gut. She was on the news, her name, her face, being dragged through the mud for a story she had no control over. The segment continued, highlighting how Langford had allegedly pretended to be homeless to test the kindness of the staff. It even included clips of William in his tattered clothes, asking for a coffee, and then taking Angela's money. It was a version of events that felt so far removed from the truth that Angela could hardly recognize it. As the camera zoomed in on her face from the video, her chest tightened. What had they done to her? The segment ended with a promise of more to come. More details on this shocking story as it unfolds. Stay tuned for exclusive interviews with those involved, including one anonymous source who claims to have witnessed the entire experiment. The screen went black, and Angela felt a rush of heat flood her face. She couldn't breathe. She stumbled out of the break room, her hands trembling as she reached for her phone. She needed to call Luis. She needed to protect him from this spectacle, this humiliation that was now her life. But before she could dial, the building's doors swung open. A group of reporters, cameras in tow, rushed in, pushing past the front desk and heading straight for her. She froze, panic creeping into her veins. "Ms. Martinez!" a woman shouted, shoving a microphone in her face. "What's your response to the allegations that Langford Industries used you for an experiment?" Angela's mind went blank. She couldn't answer. How could she explain this? How could she talk to these people who had already decided her fate? Another reporter shouted from the back, "Do you feel used? Do you feel betrayed by Langford Industries?" Angela stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to run, but the reporters closed in, their questions relentless. It felt like a swarm, each question a blow she couldn't dodge. "Leave me alone," she cried, her voice breaking. But they didn't stop. They kept asking, pressing, until she felt like she might break under the weight of it all. Finally, someone in the crowd shouted, "Is it true you were paid to participate in the experiment? Were you paid to deceive your coworkers?" The words hit Angela like a slap. She turned on her heel and bolted, running as fast as she could out the back door and into the alley behind the building. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she pushed herself to run faster, her mind spinning. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was exposure, public shame. She couldn't outrun it, though. The reporters were everywhere, the questions unrelenting. And somewhere, in the distance, Angela could feel the world she had carefully built collapsing around her. Angela had never imagined she would find herself in this position, the weight of it pressing down on her like an anchor, dragging her deeper into a storm she couldn't escape. The flashing lights from cameras, the whispers from every corner of the room, the glint of microphones thrust toward her face. It was too much. The reporters had surrounded her like wolves, eager to tear apart any shred of dignity she had left. She had tried to run, to disappear, but it was impossible. She stood now in the heart of Langford Industries, in the cold, sterile boardroom, the place where decisions were made, where people's lives were weighed like numbers on a spreadsheet. The polished wood table gleamed under the bright lights, reflecting the faces of the 12 board members who watched her like hawks, their cold, calculating eyes fixed on her every move. The air in the room was thick with tension, a storm that had been building for weeks now, ever since the story had broken. The whole world knew her name, knew her face. She was no longer just Angela Martinez, the cleaner at Langford Industries. No, she was the face of a scandal. The woman who had been caught in the middle of an experiment orchestrated by one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. William Langford sat at the far end of the table, his face a mask of calm. He looked nothing like the man she had first met, nothing like the homeless stranger who had caught her attention with his humility and gratitude.
Now he was dressed in a crisp suit, his hair neatly combed, and his posture straight, every inch the CEO he had claimed to be. But Angela knew the truth. She had seen the cracks in the facade, the moments when his mask had slipped, revealing the chaos beneath. "Ms. Martinez," began Mitchell Richardson, the board member who had taken charge of the meeting, his voice smooth, his words laced with venom. "You've made quite a spectacle of yourself, haven't you?" Angela's breath caught in her throat, but she refused to let her anger show. She had been through too much in the past few days to let someone like Richardson get under her skin. She knew what he was trying to do. He was trying to break her, to make her feel small. But she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. "I didn't make a spectacle of myself," Angela replied, her voice steady, despite the turmoil inside. "Your company did that. I'm just trying to survive in it." Richardson's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He motioned for the others to remain silent as he continued. "You were part of an experiment, Ms. Martinez, a controlled test conducted by the CEO himself, William Langford. You and several other employees were unwitting participants in this so-called experiment, which, as we now know, violated every ethical guideline and company policy." Angela could feel the weight of their eyes on her, each word slicing through her like a knife. But she stood firm, refusing to let them see her flinch. She glanced at William, sitting quietly at the head of the table. He had been the one to orchestrate it all, the one who had dragged her into this mess. But there was more to it, something deeper. She knew that now. "You really don't understand, do you?" she said, her voice rising slightly. "This isn't about a test. This is about control. It's about you and your company using people like me for your own gain, for your own amusement. You turned me into a pawn in your game." A murmur rippled through the room. Richardson shot her a glare, but she continued, her words gaining strength. "You think you can just pretend to be one of us, to live like we live, and understand what it's like? You think that makes you better than me, better than the people you're supposed to be helping?" William's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Angela could feel the tension in the room, but she couldn't stop now. She had to make them see the truth. She had to make them understand the damage they had done. "I didn't ask to be part of your experiment," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I was just doing my job. I was just trying to survive. But you came in here, pretending to be someone else, pretending to care, and you turned everything into a game. And now, look at what's happened." The room was silent. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, and even Mitchell Richardson seemed momentarily taken aback by Angela's words. But it didn't last long. He cleared his throat, regaining control. "Enough," he said. "This isn't the time for theatrics. We are here to discuss the fallout of this situation and what steps we are going to take moving forward." Angela's heart sank. She knew what was coming next. They were going to push her aside, blame her for everything, and let William Langford walk away unscathed. They would find a way to make her the scapegoat. But she wasn't going to let that happen. "I'm not the problem here," she said, her voice steady now. "The problem is that you, and your entire company, have been using people like me for years. You've built your empire on the backs of people who don't have a voice, people who are invisible to you. And now you're trying to hide behind your fancy boardrooms and your corporate jargon, but you can't escape what you've done." She turned to William, her gaze locking with his. For the first time, she saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, a crack in his perfect facade. "You used me, William. You lied to me. And now you're trying to make it all go away, like it never happened. But it did, and we're going to fix it. Or I swear to you, I will make sure the world knows exactly who you are." William's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he didn't speak. Angela could feel the heat of his frustration, but there was something else there too, something softer, something that had been buried beneath his layers of deceit. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Finally, it was Thomas, William's assistant, who broke it. "I've been monitoring the situation closely," Thomas said, stepping forward with a stack of papers. "And I think it's time we take a different approach." He laid the papers on the table, and the board members leaned forward, their eyes scanning the documents. Angela could see the shift in the room, the subtle change in their demeanor as they realized something.
Mr. Langford has been testing things, Thomas continued, and the results are clear. Employee satisfaction has gone up, turnover rates have dropped, and in areas where wages were increased, productivity has actually gone up. These are the facts. Angela felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This was it. This was what William had been trying to show her all along. The good he had done, hidden beneath the betrayal. She could see it now, the pieces falling into place. "Are we supposed to forget everything that happened?" Angela said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and frustration. "Are we supposed to ignore the fact that people's lives were manipulated for the sake of data?" William stood up, his face hardening. We don't forget, but we move forward." The boardroom fell silent again, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Finally, one of the older board members, Mrs. Chun, spoke. "I founded this company with William's father," she said softly, looking around the room. "And I can't help but wonder, did we forget why we started this? We were supposed to build a company that treated people right, that valued their dignity. Maybe it's time we remember that." The room was still, and for the first time, Angela saw a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. The days that followed the boardroom meeting were a blur. For Angela, each moment felt like a battle between the past and the present, between what had been done to her and what she could still salvage from the wreckage of her life. She had made her point in that room. She had made them listen, had forced them to face the consequences of their actions. But now, outside the sterile walls of Langford Industries, the real world was waiting for her. And it wasn't just the world that was watching. It was he, William Langford, the man who had turned her life upside down, who had used her in ways she couldn't even begin to untangle. Angela hadn't seen him since that moment in the boardroom. He had promised to make things right, but Angela wasn't so sure that even he knew what that meant. She had been betrayed, not just by the company, but by him. The man who had once seemed so genuine, so kind in his own rough way, had shown her a different side of himself. A side that had used her, manipulated her, played with her trust like it was nothing. Yet as much as she wanted to hate him for that, there was a part of her that couldn't help but wonder if, beneath all the deception, there was still some semblance of the man she had once believed in. The knock on the door came as she sat at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee that had long since lost its warmth. It was a quiet knock, tentative, almost as if the person on the other side was unsure whether they should even be there.
Angela didn't need to open the door to know who it was. She could feel him, the weight of his presence pressing against the thin veneer of her resistance. William Langford. She stood up slowly, her bones creaking as she made her way to the door. For a moment, she stood there, her hand on the knob, her mind racing with everything she wanted to say to him. She was still angry, still hurt, and yet there was something else. A sense of unfinished business, a feeling that this conversation needed to happen, no matter how painful it might be. She opened the door. William stood there, looking every bit the polished CEO she had seen in the boardroom. Dressed in a sharp suit, his gray hair perfectly styled, his demeanor calm, but his eyes. Those eyes were different. They held a vulnerability that she hadn't seen before, a quiet desperation, as if he was waiting for her to make the first move. "I know you don't owe me anything," he began, his voice softer than she expected. "But I needed to come, to explain, to apologize." Angela took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the doorframe. Apologize. The word felt heavy in the air, almost as if it carried more weight than any of them could truly bear. She had been waiting for this moment, this apology, for what felt like a lifetime, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure it was enough. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said in that meeting," William continued, his eyes searching hers, pleading for some kind of understanding. "I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen." Angela crossed her arms, trying to steady herself, trying to keep the flood of emotions at bay. "It wasn't just me you hurt, William," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It was everyone, every worker you've used, every person who's been made invisible by your company. You turned us into experiments. And for what? To feel like you could understand us? To play God with our lives?" William flinched, the pain in his eyes unmistakable. I thought, if I could see the world through your eyes, if I could understand the struggle, Then maybe I could change things for the better. I thought I could fix it, but I see now how wrong I was." Angela's heart twisted. She wanted to shout at him, to tell him that he could never understand her life, that he had no right to play with people's trust like that. But instead, she found herself simply listening. Listening to the man who had shattered her world, listening to the apology that felt too little, too late. "Did you ever stop to think," she said slowly, her voice thick with emotion, "that maybe you weren't supposed to fix anything? Maybe you were just supposed to listen. Maybe we didn't need your help. We needed respect. We needed dignity. But instead, you used us." William's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Angela thought he might say something in his defense. But he didn't. Instead, he looked away, his eyes flicking to the ground, and then back to her. "I was wrong," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, for everything." Angela stood there in silence, the weight of his apology hanging between them. Sorry. It was such a small word, but it carried so much. Could she believe it? Could she forgive him? "I'm not sure if I can forgive you," she said softly, her voice faltering. "You've hurt me. You've hurt so many people." William nodded slowly, the sadness in his eyes deepening. I know I can never make up for what I've done, but I want to try. I want to make it right." Angela's heart wavered, and for a moment, she was lost in the silence that stretched between them. But then she straightened, her resolve returning. "You want to make it right?" she asked, her voice steady. "Then show me. Show me you're willing to do whatever it takes to fix what you've broken. But do it on my terms. No more games, no more pretending, no more experiments. Just honesty." William's eyes widened, a flicker of hope sparking in his gaze. "Anything," he said immediately. "I'll do anything, just tell me what you need." Angela took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she held them at her sides. "I want my dignity back. I want the dignity of every worker in that company to be acknowledged. I want people to be treated like they matter, not like they're invisible. And I want the changes you promised to be real, not just for show." William didn't hesitate. "I'll make it happen. I'll put everything I can into making things right. I swear it." For a moment, they stood there in silence, each of them knowing the weight of the promise that had been made. There was no easy way to undo the damage that had been done, no quick fix for the years of exploitation, manipulation, and betrayal. But in that moment, Angela believed him. Perhaps it was hope, the hope that things could change, that people could change.
"I'll hold you to that," she said, her voice steady but resolute. "But I won't forget what happened, and neither should you." William nodded. "I wouldn't expect you to. I'll do everything in my power to make sure that you never have to feel like this again." Angela stepped back, pulling the door open wider. "Then go," she said. "Go prove it. But remember, no more lies, no more pretending." As William turned to leave, he paused at the threshold. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer now, the weight of his words carrying a sincerity that touched something deep inside her. "You don't need to thank me," Angela replied, her voice firm. "Just do better." And with that, he walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway, knowing that this was only the beginning of the road to forgiveness. Not an easy road, not a perfect one, but it was a road worth traveling. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance that both of them could find redemption. The days had stretched into weeks, and with each passing one, Angela felt a subtle shift within herself. It wasn't that the memories of what had happened, what had been done to her colleagues, to countless others, had faded. They hadn't. They were still raw, still sharp, lingering in the back of her mind like a wound that hadn't quite healed. But what had changed was how she viewed them, how she viewed herself, and how she viewed the road that lay ahead. Angela had always been a survivor. She had learned early in life how to navigate the shadows, how to make the most of what little she had. But what she hadn't realized until that moment, the moment when William Langford had stood at her door, offering the apology she had longed for, was that sometimes survival wasn't enough. Sometimes survival meant something more. It meant standing tall, standing for something greater than yourself, and being willing to forgive when the world had every reason to make you hard, to make you bitter. And forgive she did, but on her terms. She had set the boundaries. She had demanded that real change be made. Not just words, but action. She had forced William Langford to confront the rot at the heart of Langford Industries. She had made him see the very people his company had ignored for years, the workers whose backs the empire had been built upon. And while that was no small victory, it was only the beginning. It had been 6 months since the boardroom confrontation, since the promises were made, and since the changes began to take root. Angela stood at the front of the conference room at Langford Industries, now a regular part of the company's reform team. She had agreed to the position of Vice President of Employee Relations, a position that didn't exist until she had come in and made her case. The conference room was different now. Gone were the darkened corners and cold, lifeless walls that had once housed only the most powerful people in the company. Today, the walls were adorned with bright, welcoming images, faces of workers, of employees, of people who had been forgotten before. The executives had made space for the workers in their photos, in their meetings, in their decisions. Angela had made sure of that. She could see William at the back of the room, his once imposing figure now standing with an air of humility. He had been working alongside her in the months since the changes had been implemented, making amends in ways he never thought he would. But today wasn't about him. It was about the company, about the employees, about what they had fought for. It was about making sure that the company, for the first time in its history, remembered the people who made it run. The cleaners, the maintenance staff, the people who had always been the invisible backbone of Langford Industries. "Good morning, everyone," Angela said, her voice calm but strong. "I know we've had our struggles. I know that it hasn't been easy. But we are here today because of one thing: change, real change, change that is long overdue." She paused, letting the words settle in the room, watching as the executives, many of whom had been resistant to the changes, nodded, their expressions no longer guarded. For the first time, Angela saw genuine acknowledgement in their eyes. "We are no longer a company that ignores the people who work for us. We are a company that values every single person who walks through these doors. We've raised wages, implemented benefits, and begun training programs for those who want to grow in this company. But most importantly, we've started seeing people, not just as numbers on a spreadsheet, but as individuals with lives, dreams, and dignity." There was a shift in the room. The air, once thick with tension, now hummed with something different, something resembling hope. Angela had pushed for this. She had fought for it, just as she had fought for the dignity of every worker, every janitor, every cleaner, and every person who had been treated like they didn't matter. And now, here she was, standing in front of the very people who had once treated her as if she were invisible. She wasn't invisible anymore. "I want to thank all of you for your continued commitment to this company," Angela continued, her eyes sweeping across the room. "And I want to make it clear that this is just the beginning. We will continue to grow, to learn, and to change. And together, we will build a company that stands as a beacon for others, a company that proves what can happen when you prioritize people over profits." Angela turned to William, who now stood beside her, his face filled with quiet admiration. He had kept his promise. Slowly, cautiously, he had let the changes take root. And now, the transformation of Langford Industries was undeniable. The company had seen a rise in employee retention, an increase in customer satisfaction, and, perhaps most significantly, an outpouring of trust from the very people they had once disregarded. William stepped forward, his voice steady but sincere. "I know I have a long way to go to rebuild the trust of many people in this room, but I am committed to doing so. I promise that this company will never again lose sight of what makes it great, its people." Angela smiled, not a smile of triumph, but a smile of something deeper, something quieter. It was the smile of someone who had finally found peace with herself, with her past, and with the road ahead. "Thank you," she said softly, turning back to the room. "But there is still much work to be done. The road to real change doesn't end here. It continues, in every office, in every hallway, and in every decision we make. And I will be here, making sure that we never forget who got us here." The meeting ended with applause, some tentative,
some enthusiastic, but all genuine. As Angela made her way out of the room, she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Luis, her son, who had grown taller, more confident in the months since the changes had started to take shape. He smiled at her, his eyes filled with pride. "You did it, Mom," he said softly. "You really did it." Angela smiled, the weight of the world lifting just a little bit. "No, Luis," she said, looking at him. "We did it." As they left the building together, Angela felt a sense of completion, not as if the journey had ended, but that it had reached a new chapter. The challenges of the past had shaped her, but they had not defined her. She had found a new purpose, one that wasn't about survival, but about creating something better. For herself, for her son, for the people who had stood with her through it all. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the streets. The city hummed with life, a world that was always moving, always changing. And Angela, for the first time in a long time, felt like she was part of that change, an agent of it, not just a bystander. She had learned something in the last few months. That change didn't just come from big corporations or powerful leaders. It came from people. People like her, people who refused to stay silent, people who believed that they could make a difference, no matter how small. And with that thought, Angela knew one thing for sure. The world might be slow to change, but it could change. And she would be there, every step of the way, making sure that when it did, it was for the better. If this story resonated with you, and you found inspiration in Angela's journey of redemption and transformation, imagine what could happen if we all took a stand for change in our own lives. What are the small actions you can take today to make a difference in your community or workplace? How can you turn your challenges into opportunities for growth, just like Angela did? If you're moved by stories of resilience, growth, and the power of making a stand, make sure to hit the like button, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to my channel for more empowering content that encourages us to see the world and ourselves in a new light. By subscribing, you'll never miss out on fresh stories and valuable insights designed to help you thrive. Let's keep this conversation going. Share your own stories of overcoming adversity, and let's support each other in our journey toward a better tomorrow. The power to change the world starts with us, and together, we can make it happen.